Hello and welcome to Endemic Times. My name is Amira. Are you one of the millions of Americans suffering from a chronic illness? Have you been wondering why your health is getting worse or why your kids are suffering from an illness that doesn't run in your family? While Big Pharma and Big Corp certainly don't want you to think there's any connection between the items in your home, the water you drink, the food you consume, and the air that you breathe as having a direct effect on your health and well being, the sad reality is that it is. We are being slowly poisoned from all angles, and our government officials are apathetic to any attempts to change our system and build a healthier America. Because the American business model of capital has overtaken everything and is obstructing protective measures to reduce or eliminate the toxic sludge that is industry. It's seeping into our water, it's hidden in our food, it is in our pharmaceuticals, and all of these are making us more and more sick with less ability to pinpoint the cause. This video will be discussing the train crash that occurred in Palestine, Ohio, and what this elevated story is bringing to light across our country, a nationwide clean water crisis where almost everywhere is seeing more toxins released into the water and the multiple ailments and diseases they cause. So let's get into it. First, let's talk about the Palestine train derailment. This catastrophic event shines a light on a nationwide issue, which is the high level of toxins, dangerous chemicals, and compounds that have made their way into our water supply. The investigation in East Palestine is still ongoing. However, it cannot be denied that the people of Palestine, specifically those living near the train derailment, are currently experiencing serious effects from the hazardous chemicals that have been burned in the area, as we can see here.
In East Palestine, Ohio, local residents are reluctant to accept advice from officials, saying that it's safe to return home 12 days after the accident. People are complaining about health issues. Lilia Luciano has more.
I would be alert and concerned, but I think I would probably be back in my house.
That was Ohio Governor Mike DeWine's answer when he was asked whether he would move back home if he lived in East Palestine, Ohio, though he did offer caveats.
I think that I would be drinking the bottled water.
There have been numerous reports in recent days of respiratory issues, burning eyes, and dead wildlife, including at least 3,500 confirmed dead fish killed by contamination.
We don't have any evidence of non-aquatic species suffering from the derailment.
Now that's a lie. There is ample evidence, sadly, that has been coming out of the area of people's pets like cats and dogs or other wildlife and even chickens that have experienced everything from wheezing, coughing, and ultimately death following this event. While this video was from a couple of days ago, it is important to note that the effects of this incident are hitting everyone and animal life alike.
5 of the train cars were carrying vinyl chloride, a highly combustible chemical linked to a higher risk of some kinds of cancers. Crews conducted a controlled release of the carcinogen to reduce the risk of an explosion.
When you have combustion or burning, you create all sorts of different byproducts. It's important to understand to cast a wide net when you're testing because you want to narrow out and rule out chemicals that could pose an acute health risk or linger around.
The governor and other officials lifted the town's evacuation order a week ago after health officials said air quality was back to acceptable levels and the city's main water supply, they said, was safe. 2 days after the evacuation order was lifted, the EPA said 3 additional hazardous chemicals were found on the derailed train cars.
This train apparently was not considered a high hazardous material train.
Yesterday, Governor DeWine revealed that since only 20 of the 150 cars contained hazardous materials, the company, citing federal law, was not required to notify the state of Ohio that the train had toxic chemicals on board.
Frankly, if this is true, and I'm told it's true, this is absurd.
This is true. According to the new rules for high-hazard flammable trains made in 2015, high-hazard flammable trains are defined as trains with 20 or more consecutive flammable liquid rail tank cars or 35 or more flammable liquid rail tank cars interspersed throughout a train. According to an FRA spokesperson speaking with the lever, the train did not qualify as an HHFT under the regulations. They continue to state that the definition of an HHFT is too narrow if it does not include a train like the one that derailed in East Palestine. In fact, it defies logic that the train was not defined as an HHFT. The reason why it was not categorized as an HHFT is because of this specific term, consecutive. That is the key word here, because it's giving allowance to companies like Norfolk Southern to set up the train cars in such a way that they can carry more hazardous chemicals by dividing out the train cars so as to not meet this already narrowly defined definition. To understand this particular train better, let's take a look at this clip.
But let's talk about the train. It was a 150-car train, 3 locomotives up front, and 150 cars, and it was headed from Madison, Illinois to Conway, Pennsylvania. Michael Graham, a member of the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, said the train was carrying 141 load cars, 9 empty cars, and 3 locomotives which were used to pull the train. And in this particular case, there were 150 cars in total. That means this train was over 9,000 feet long, nearly 2 miles in length. Now, these trains were DOT, Department of Transportation, 111 tank cars. About 70% of the cars used in the US are of this type. They carry non-pressurized fluids, typically around 30,000 gallons, and can weigh about 198,000 pounds each. The NTSB said that 38 trains came off the tracks with fire damaging an additional 12 cars. But of all of this, 20 of the cars were found to have harmful chemicals, explosives, and other potentially hazardous and risky cars.
So as we can see, there were 20 cars that contained what is considered to be hazardous materials or chemicals. But this train wasn't considered an HHFT. And the reason for that, I'm pretty sure, is because of how they distributed the cars on the train. It allowed them to have 20 cars, but because they weren't consecutive, that's why it wasn't categorized as such. And what's even more concerning, of course, is the chemicals themselves. And unfortunately, until the EPA and further testing is done, it seems we won't know what all of the chemicals were. There should be an easy way to check all of this, like a manifest that the train company likely does have, but is probably, because of everything that is happening, not wanting to divulge that information. But here's what we do know about the known chemicals that have been released to the public.
Let's do a quick recap of the various chemicals that were confirmed by the NTSB to have been in the incident. The first is vinyl chloride, a highly flammable, colorless gas used when making plastics that are known to be carcinogenic. Here's the chemical equation for vinyl chloride. And by the way, this is largely used to produce PVC pipe, the white pipe you have in your backyard irrigation and other things. It's a wonderful thing. It's UV resistant, waterproof, weatherproof, and does a really good job of handling pipes. But the production of this chemical is pretty dangerous and highly flammable. There were also cars known to be containing butyl acrylate, a flammable clear liquid used in making paints that can cause irritation to the eye, skin, and respiratory system. There is also ethylexyl acrylate, ethylene glycol monobutyl, and isobutylene. Two really big problems around this is the formation of hydrogen chloride and phosgene. Again, hydrogen chloride is HCl, which is the formation of hydrogen, which is found in water molecules and dew in the air, and the chlorine from the vinyl chloride solution. And this is a dangerous compound that when mixed in a solution of water becomes hydrochloric acid. The bigger problem is phosgene, which has the following chemical composition. There's a carbon element bonded with a double bond to oxygen and 2 chlorines. This is a really big deal because this is actually used in World War I as a chemical weapon. And so while it's useful as a precursor for polyurethanes and polycarbonate plastics, it's really, really dangerous. And like I mentioned, World War I was responsible for over 85,000 deaths.
85,000 deaths. This is not something to treat dismissively. This is serious because of what history tells us. History and present day has shown us the level of capture that corporate America has on our government, from campaign donations, super PACs, and lobbying.
Cut forward to 2017, and the rail industry lobbyists managed to successfully get Senate Republicans to rescind part of a rule designed to improve braking systems. You see, regulators had wanted rail cars that carried hazardous, flammable materials to use an electric braking system that can stop trains faster than the typical air brakes. But Norfolk Southern's lobbying group argued that doing so would, quote, impose tremendous costs without providing offsetting safety benefits. Would ECP brakes have reduced the severity of this accident? Yes, said Stephen Dittmeyer. But rail companies don't want to spend the money. The Federal Railroad Administration estimated the brake requirement will cost about $500 million. The 2017 profits, by the way, were over $10.5 billion. But hey, I guess the $6 million they spent on GOP donations in 2017 was a cheaper bet than making our railways safer.
Looking more closely at the reporting from The Lever, they reported that the AAR lobbying group concurred that the costs of the ECP rule substantially outweigh its benefits and claimed the mandate would cost them about $3 billion, or roughly 2 weeks of operating revenue in a typical year. The FRA estimated the brake requirement would cost about $500 million. This is where the level of corporate capture that has overtaken our government and that has hindered our ability to have proper safety measures and protocols is maddening. A multi-billion-dollar company gets to say that 2 weeks of operating revenue is too much and outweighs the benefits. You mean the benefits of having less hazardous train cars on one train? You're telling us that it outweighs the health and safety of the people of Palestine and the multitude of other locations that have suffered from these types of events that occur because of corporate greed that comes from slashing workers, taking away any ability to fight for some sick days, overworked, exhausted, and sometimes sick train conductors and engineers because they don't get a day off.
Over the same time period during which the railroad industry was fighting safety measures, they were also slashing their workforce by nearly 30% and embracing a scheduling strategy known as precision scheduled railroading. The scheduling strategy makes it very difficult for rail workers to be able to take any time off, but it also leads to an increase in accidents. Workers are sick, they're tired, and trains that are nearly 2 miles long are being staffed and checked for issues by just 2 rail workers. Cuts to staff and tight timing means cutbacks on car inspections, which may have led to the axle failure and need to rely on emergency brakes in Ohio. Again, not the new and efficient electric brakes, but the old air brake system. Thanks, again, lobbyists. In 2022, Socialist Workers Party candidate for governor of Pennsylvania said, quote, "The rail bosses, backed by the federal government, refuse to address any safety or other substantive issues raised by rail workers through our unions in the recent negotiations. And their lust for profits, the railroad bosses are running increasingly long, heavy trains and pushing on rail workers smaller crews, arbitrary schedules, longer shifts, and more work than ever before. Massive cuts have been made in the operating crafts, car inspectors, mechanical and maintenance of workforces. All this leads to derailments like this. Corporations like Norfolk Rail routinely externalize the risks of operating their dangerous businesses, from which they profit in the billions, onto the public. If they were ever made to pay for the messes they cause, maybe they'd invest in safety. Maybe it would be cheaper just to pay their workers and make sure that they were well rested and able to do their jobs. They drive trains slower and jump at the opportunity to install safer brakes. But these companies almost never have to pay, at least not as much as they actually owe.
See, the stock buybacks and record-breaking profits in the billions of dollars is just not enough money to put towards safety, and it certainly isn't a more important benefit to put better brakes on the trains and ensure better schedules and health of workers. That's not a profitable benefit. When our transportation secretary and president are silent, it speaks volumes. It speaks to the level of corporate power that has overtaken our government and politicians, all for corporate gains. And it's not just the government and politicians, it's also our legacy corporate media. One of the biggest critiques on social media right now is the level of what looks like and feels like a cover-up coming from the media, or they're barely scratching the surface on the event and the levels of corporate capture and weakness in our legislative branch. And there's a big reason for why you're not seeing this in the news the way that you should.
Norfolk Southern Railway is owned by the following companies. The largest shareholders are the Vanguard Group, BlackRock Fund, and SSGA, which is the State Street Global Advisors Group. And their ownership stakes are as follows. So the largest news companies, CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, CBS. Here's what that data looks like. And as you can see, there's a clear pattern. BlackRock, Vanguard Group, and SSGA show up in pretty much every single one of them.
This This is what so many of us are talking about when it comes to serious issues that mainstream media ignores. Many people don't want to believe this, but it's true. The media is beholden to their donors and the government officials for which these corporations continue to buy up and capture. This is why you're not seeing coverage of East Palestine as much as you should, and it's certainly why we're not seeing the level of in-depth coverage on Norfolk Southern, its owners, and their connected industries, because those other industries are the media and big pharma, but that's for another day. When I talk about the media narrative spin, this is exactly what I'm talking about. The event in East Palestine, while tragic, is but a micro representation of a much larger crisis that is affecting the entirety of the nation, and that is our supply, or lack thereof, of clean drinking water. While the EPA administrator that has made their way to Palestine has assured residents that the water is safe to drink, it is understandable that the residents are hesitant to believe this initial finding, and they should be skeptical, because when we look at the state of our clean water supply nationwide, it's abysmal. A 9-month study conducted by The Guardian and Consumer Reports in 2021 found that drinking water from 118 of the 120 locations tested across the US had levels of PFAs, or arsenic, above Consumer Reports' recommended maximum. PFAs, which are considered forever chemicals, meaning we can't really do anything about them, are typically found in household items like nonstick cookware, stain-resistant fabrics and carpets, water-repellent clothing, and hundreds of other common products that can seep into water from factories, landfills, and other sources. With the amount of train derailments containing toxic spills and also additional environmental hazards that come from the industrial aspect of our manufacturing sector, the widening concern of the integrity of our water supply is growing. Arsenic is also extremely poisonous to humans and presents a very clear, dangerous situation. While we don't know the full list of hazardous chemicals that were being transported on the train in East Palestine, it connects to this larger issue of our water supply that is continually being subjected to these kinds of events, with little to no safeguards, restrictions, or consequences for the companies responsible, or at the very least, partially liable. The people of East Palestine are right to be concerned for the health and safety of their children. Known contaminants in water, like PFAs, have been linked to learning delays in children, cancer, and other health problems. There has also been a probable link between exposure to types of PFAs and health problems like high cholesterol, ulcerative colitis, thyroid disease, pregnancy-induced hypertension, and testicular and kidney cancers. Again, this is just what we know that is happening nationwide. In this study, they found that in at least 2,337 communities in 49 states have drinking water known to be contaminated with PFAs, and found PFAs in 117 of the 120 samples tested across the country. In any given year from 1982 to 2015, between 9 million and 45 million Americans got their drinking water from a source that was in violation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And it's important to note that those most at risk are those that live in rural, low-income areas. The water crisis in Flint, Michigan came to media attention in 2015 because of the extreme effects that people were suffering from in that area and the undeniable lack of infrastructure and care that those residents deserved. In Flint, much of the focus has been on the elevated levels of lead, but there were also findings of coliform bacteria, which is an indicator of bacterial contamination in general, like nitrates, arsenic, and other contaminants. In Armin, Missouri, a substation was found to be the source of contamination that led to the city of St. Charles to close multiple wells. And lo and behold, vinyl chloride was one of the hazardous chemicals found that led to the shutting down of 5 of 7 wells. Vinyl chloride is one of the hazardous chemicals that was released in Palestine. It's these types of things that make it so hard, understandably, for people to believe these experts, because we have seen during the age of the pandemic that experts can be told what to say to suit the current narrative. And right now, that narrative that they are trying to spin in Palestine is that everything is just fine. Much of what is likely happening to the water supply in Palestine mirrors what residents in Flint, Jackson, Washington, D.C., and across the country are experiencing. And that is a myriad of factors that are leading to a crisis of a failing clean water supply. From aging infrastructure, a lack of financing for rehabilitation, climate change, and extreme weather events, as well as historical disinvestment in communities of color, all of these play a part in what we are seeing. And let's take a look at the larger things that we are seeing that can arguably be linked, at least partially, to our issue of our failing clean water supply, and that is our health. I'm not saying that these are direct links, but when looking at the data, it's becoming clear that something is making Americans and the global population that is also suffering from a lack of clean water more and more sick. There has been a dramatic increase in cancer in people under the age of 50. Researchers from Brigham and Women's Hospital revealed that the incidence of early onset cancers, including breast, colon, esophagus, kidney, liver, and pancreas, has dramatically increased around the world, beginning in 1990, that is increasing with each generation. The team found that early life exposure, which encompasses an individual's diet, lifestyle, and keyword here, environmental exposures and microbiome, has changed substantially in the last several decades. I would argue that one of the biggest factors, along with the toxins that are allowed to seep into our water supply because of government legislative failures, oversight failures, and a serious lack of penalties for companies that do not dispose of their waste properly, is our food. The FDA permits a copious amount of what they consider to be approved chemicals into our food supply. These additives have only increased as the need for convenience and speed has overtaken the United States and much of the world. That means that food is being made quicker, is more processed, and contains more chemicals. And as we are seeing, the chemicals are elevating the health risks in people. So if we have this level of chemicals in our water supply, and then add the food supply and the level of chemicals that are in our food, along with our environment that we know is changing, and then things like air quality, pollution, etc. All of these factors are making people more prone to illness. This data here is from 2002. I tried to find some more recent info, but I just couldn't find it. But as we can see, even then, the current and projected number of people with chronic medical conditions was rising. Factoring in the pandemic, the vaccine, and the increase in comorbidity, these numbers are likely even higher now. This all ties in, at least to me, to a much darker and more insidious aspect of all of this, that we are the commodity. Our health, or lack thereof, is a profit motive for big pharma. People are getting sicker, which means they are needing to find health services and are paying out astronomical costs, mostly because a lot of the way that insurance is packaged, it does not cover everything, and sadly doesn't even cover some basics. It covers very little in the grand scheme of things, which means that people are paying higher and higher out-of-pocket costs for health concerns that are stemming, very likely, from their environment, that Big Corp is doing everything they can to obfuscate responsibility and incentivize our government to pare down, limit liability, and narrow definitions to suit them. Big Pharma, like Big Corp, has captured so much of our government and has played a critical role in the failure to adjust or modify our healthcare system to better provide actual healthcare services to the masses. And why is that? Because of money. This is the problem with a profit model for healthcare. Nearly half of the people with a chronic condition have more than one, and it is these chronic illnesses that are a major driver of increased use of healthcare services. And surprise, surprise, it's creating higher and higher healthcare costs, and people with chronic conditions amount for over 90% of prescription drug use. Chronic conditions are generally not curable, meaning every new person that develops a chronic illness becomes another commodity to Big Pharma that they can't lose. Some of these chronic conditions are things like hypertension, heart disease, and arthritis. Today, there is an estimated 133 million Americans with chronic illness, which is 15 million higher than just a decade ago, and the number is expected to reach 170 million by 2030. Again, factoring in COVID, long COVID symptoms, and adverse effects from the vaccine, this number is going to likely be even higher. Some people might say that this is all a big stretch, and that's fine. I don't think so, however. So much of our healthcare system is not actually about helping people and curing ailments. We also have many, many people that are over-medicated, and much of that comes from the American health system that incentivizes medical practitioners to prescribe medications. People are being over-medicated. People are being slowly poisoned by their water, their food, and the air that they breathe. And sadly, what all of this corporate and big pharma capture tells me is that we are the commodity that they need to keep sick and distracted. They don't want to take on liability in any situation because it would then create legal precedent to hold other industries, companies, and people liable and accountable for the actions they have been and continue to take that are putting American lives at risk. It's not about health, it's not about protecting the citizens. It's all about that money. Our feckless politicians have been bought out. Our captured media that has insidious companies like BlackRock and Vanguard as their sugar daddies, they are not going to go to this level of coverage and looking at how these things tie together, or at the very least, asking the questions of whether this is all connected. It sure seems that way when you take that big, broad step back. But they are all happy with their blood-stained millions because this doesn't affect them. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment down below and let me know what you think of this. If you're suffering from a chronic illness, what you think about our clean water supply, or lack thereof. Hit me down in the comments below, hit that like button, subscribe, and also share with those that you think might find this information helpful. And as always, remember to stay safe, take care, and be kind to each other.